Hey everybody, my name's Chris and I'm a bookaholic. If you guys like books, you are in the right place. I love books. I love talking about books, I like buying books, I like hearing about the books that you bought. I like actually hearing about the books that you think I should read. If it's about books, I'm pretty much all in. So today I want to talk about the end of the world. And actually these books I think would be kind of cool to assist a person in their exploration of all the possibilities for ways that the world will end or may end, or possibly how do we survive these kind of cataclysmic moments. So it's going to be a happy stack of books. It's the end of the world as we know it. But we feel fine. Why? Because we've got great books to read. All right, I actually don't know if the rationale works for that, but it doesn't really matter. We're just going to dive in and see what kind of books we got here. If it's the end of the world, whether you're talking about an electromagnetic pulse, some sort of weird viral contagion that basically annihilates the entire human populace, some sort of scenario in which you have zombie-like creatures, we seem to be interested in that. So there's an idea of like, what would happen in the ultimate crisis? Would we survive? And there's something about that's certainly appealing to us, so much so that we have a whole kind of subgenre of literature that may or may not be in the science fiction category, and of course with the pandemic somehow went from fiction over to nonfiction for a little bit. So I want to just look at a few that I have read and a few that I haven't read, and then basically hear from you. You tell me what you've read and what you would recommend. First and foremost, I just want to take a second and just kind of draw your attention to Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I really dig this book a lot, and she has phenomenal writing, and she's looking at the idea of what would happen if the human populace has some sort of a viral contagion that takes out the majority of the populace. And of course, I had certainly a lot of Stephen King Stand vibes going on with that whole idea. That idea of a global pandemic, some sort of a virus illness that takes everybody out. What do you do? How do you survive? I would highly recommend, of course, The Stand and Station 11. Both of those books I've read and I love. They're phenomenal. A book I haven't actually read yet is called I Am Pilgrim, and I don't know exactly where I heard about this book, but I definitely think it's worth checking out, at least for me anyway. And maybe if you've read this by Terry Hayes, you could tell me yay or nay, but for me it kind of seems like something that I might be interested in. We'll see. Speaking of pandemic type of scenarios, Survivor Song by Paul Tremblay. This was really good. He's great. He interacts with you on Twitter, and I was reading this and the contagion, even going through these animals, and then what kind of happens, and you have people who basically derail, and they are crazy and insane. And thankfully, in a way, at the end of this, there is some sort of realization that it's not going to continue on forever and ever. And so while it's going on and what's happening and the complete disquiet and the unrest that's happening in that scenario, it's pretty epic. Give it a try. Ken Follett, this book I loved, and unfortunately, I felt like this is really about what would happen. Small series of events that basically culminate into pressing that button for nuclear war. And the more you read this, at least for me, when I read this and finished this, I realized it would not take much in our current political disquiet for us to find ourselves in that very scenario. And I love this book, and I also loathe the fact that this is so possible that we can do that to one another. So anyway, this is really good. And most of you who are familiar with Ken Follett know that he's a phenomenal writer, and this one maybe doesn't have as much traction as some of his other books, but for me, this was the perfect book kind of at the perfect time. Here's another one I have not read, but it kind of follows that idea. I don't know what the deal is with me in pandemic books, but some sort of like virus. Lawrence Wright, The End of October. Now, I have not finished this book. I started it. We'll see. Part of me, I don't really want a ton of focus on the politics so much. I'm far more interested in, again, character development and that kind of thing. So we'll see. I might give this a little bit more time. I've just kind of began. At some point, I felt like this has got, you almost have your Anthony Fauci character in there. I thought, is this just kind of a retelling of what we're already living through and had lived through? I'm not sure I want that, but we'll see. So here's another book, Annihilation. Now, this is part of a trilogy, and this is a phenomenal book. For many people out there, it's no surprise. Jeff Vandermeer is a very respected writer. But for me, this was my first experience and dive into his writings, and the whole premise was really fascinating. The idea of just kind of these journals and these entries of people who have been into this scenario before, and what are you learning, and what are you growing, and what's going to be allowed, and how is, Big Brother kind of keeping an eye on things, and is this place alive and what's going on? Is the vegetation trying to eat me? I mean, it's pretty cool. So I don't know if that was actually a spoiler, but I think it's good. Give it a try. If you like some sort of cool, weird science fiction type of stuff, this might be good for you. It was good for me. Zombies. I've never read this. I don't think I ever will read this, but I might. The Zombie Survival Guide. Didn't we watch The Walking Dead for that? All right. There's a lady named Molly Gloss, and this book, Outside the Gates, I thought was phenomenal. And again, it was kind of this idea of a scenario and a situation in which you have people who kind of fall into this, this is acceptable, this is allowed, and those of you who don't, you have to be ostracized and thrown out, and then how do you survive? And, villagers were always warned that monsters live outside the gates, but when a young boy named Vren is cast out, he finds a home in the world beyond. Molly Gloss, dystopian fantasy novel, is just as timely, poignant, and stirring as ever in this brand new edition. Well, I enjoyed this brand new edition. I'd never read anything by Molly Gloss. I have a couple of her other books here, Wildlife and The Hearts of Horses, but I don't think these are some sort of weird post-apocalyptic or kind of some sort of survival scenario. That was kind of a cool book. And actually the bad in that was like the antagonist was a worthy character. It was kind of a unique and cool take on things. Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale, which for its time was pretty radical. I mean, it seems a little bit old hat. It's maybe not as adventurous and exciting, but you have to remember that came out, I believe it was in the 80s. So it was pretty innovative and profound even at its time. And unfortunately, again, there's a lot more that's seemingly realistic than should be for a work of fiction. Handmaid's Tale. American, when I read it right at the beginning of the pandemic. So, last but not least, P.D. James, Children of Men. This is a book I definitely am going to read. This is going to go on my TBR for 2023. I've never read anything by P.D. James. I loved the movie, and the premise seemed fascinating, so we'll see. Anyway, what kind of end-of-the-world books have you read that you liked? Of course, I like S.M. Sterling's Dies the Fire, and I like Wool, that is very popular by Hugh Howey. I'm certainly not done reading this genre. Let me know if there's some books that you've read along this kind of lines that make sense. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. If you got a book recommendation, I'd love to hear about it. So let me know. And thanks for supporting and being a part of what we're doing here. And by we, I mean literally me. I can't.